top 10 favorite Buffy and Angel seasons. Part 1. Hello there. As I may have mentioned on a few occasions, Buffy is my second favorite television series of all time. I like Angel too. Sometimes. Though that strange subset of very strange wannabe iconoclasts who insists that Angel was actually better than Buffy. Yeah, no. Sorry. No. But together the Buffy and Angelverse comprise no less than 12 seasons of television, and before they go and ruin it with a reboot nobody asked for, which will, in our current pop culture and political climate, almost certainly be complete fucking shit, I thought I'd go and give a list of my top 10 favorites. Because why not? 10. Angel Season 1. Angel was an odd show that underwent a lot of changes in direction over its 5 years, some more appealing to me than others. Season 1 frames itself, for the most part, as a weird detective show with a supernatural bent and is pretty entertaining. There are some bumps in the road. The loss of the wonderful Doyle early on and his hasty unplanned replacement with the initially irritating Wesley, was a big disappointment to me at the time and is still pretty jarring when watched today, even if it did become a total badass eventually. I have to be honest and say that Angel and Cordelia were always my least favorite characters in Buffy, which did mean that it didn't bother me too much when they left the parent show, but also kind of perhaps made it inevitable that the spin-off was never really going to come close to the original for me. And I'm going to come out and confess something that will no doubt make me even more unpopular than that, tee-hee. I fucking hate Wolfram and Hart. And I don't mean in a love-to-hate way. The idea of an evil law firm was interesting enough, and could have made for a solid enough season arc in the Buffy style. But as the show went on it became clear that they had no real idea what to do with them and they were just there to be a kind of general all-purpose baddie, with no endgame in sight. Now the likes of Christian Kane, Stephanie Romanoff and Sam Anderson were all good actors, but I just found the whole thing tedious as fuck after a while, which is one of my biggest banes with the spin-off show. There's not much of them in season 1, though they do start becoming more prominent toward the end, as the turgid supernatural soap opera, and never has a show's character more accurately disparaged their own show. Of seasons 2 and 3, my least favorite of the entire Buffy and Angelverse, begins to loom large. 9. Buffy Season 6. Often seen by fans as the worst season of Buffy, and its placing here probably indicates that I don't really disagree, though I certainly don't hate it or anything like that. There's plenty of very fine episodes, including the excellently dark 2-hour opener, and the last few episodes of the season as, spoilers, people, Tara's death sends a Willow who's already had a bad season spiraling into complete vengeful homicidal insanity, are also pretty fucking epic. But, while the nerd trio are interesting enough, the lack of a really strong antagonist until the last few episodes is a bit of a bummer, as is the loss of Anthony Head as Giles for most of the season, and the rather depressing tone of the season as a whole. 8. Angel Season 5. It was a shame Angel didn't carry on at least a few more seasons, as I did feel it was getting better toward the end. Season 5 is a typically odd season, departing from previous directions again as Angel and company actually take over Wolfram and Hart and try to make it a force for good, with possibly predictable results. This direction does make Wolfram and Hart more bearable to me than was previously the case, and the ensemble cast was very solid indeed by this point, with the lovely Amy Acker as Fred, Lorne and the new badass version of Wesley being my favorites. And the addition of the always hilarious Spike to the regular cast is fantastic. However, the cruel killing of Fred, so soon after the cruel treatment of Cordelia in the previous season, is less welcome, and the last episode, while dramatic, is pretty unsatisfying as a finale to the whole series. 7. Buffy Season 7. The final season of Buffy is, like Season 6, often criticized by some fans. I again kind of agree, but not to the extent of Season 6. Honestly, Season 7 was, along with one other, The season of Buffy I enjoyed least on first broadcast. Yes, I actually season 6 when I first watched them, and yet I've actually come to really rather enjoy and appreciate it on rewatches. The first story arc is pretty epic, dark and badass, and there are some excellent episodes, including a much more satisfying final ever episode than Angel got. Although still not back as a regular, Anthony Head is also much more featured as Giles again than he was in season 6. This is partly down to some clever filming in the first half of the season, presumably all done in the UK and then spaced out to make it seem Giles is more present than he actually is, but it works well enough. The evil Caleb also gives the season's last third a big boost, with the usually affable Nathan Fillion being surprisingly convincing as the utterly evil and seemingly indestructible psycho preacher man. However, there are issues which grate a little, especially for a final season. The heavy focus on Spike, who though I do love him is very much overused in season 7, and the arrival of all the potential slayers, the return of Faith later on in the season, and the important new character of Principal Robin Wood, leaves some of the regulars, notably Dawn and Xander, with very little to do for a lot of the season, which is a bit disappointing. And, I'll say it, the Willow and Kennedy relationship also falls flat. Watching it again, I don't think Kennedy is necessarily a bad character, or even necessarily wrong for Willow, which I did think initially, but, as with Dawn and Xander this season, it's poorly developed. The build-up is decent enough, but once they actually get together there's basically nothing done with their romance aside from a couple of snogging scenes. Which is nice to look at and all, but doesn't do much to get you emotionally invested in them. As with Dawn and Xander, it's almost certainly a consequence of having such a big story arc of the first's attempt to wipe out the Slayer lineage and take over the world, along with the huge story arc of Spike getting a soul, together with the sheer number of other characters that need servicing all in the 122-episode season, which is a shame. Another season would almost certainly have been a bit more even with the characters and given us more time to actually give a shit about Willow and Kennedy, because, as it stands, the show ends with my favorite character in my least favorite of all her relationships. I am complaining a lot here, I realize, and I don't want to give the impression that I hate or even don't like season 7, because I do think it's pretty cool for the most part, and, unlike some fans who seem to think the show should have ended with season 5, I'm more than happy with Buffy's 7-year run as a whole. 6. Buffy Season 1. I know some people will object to this, as season 1 often seems looked down on. Season 1 is only 12 episodes, inevitably making it seem less epic and emotionally complex as the later and longer seasons, but I love it anyway. I actually love the innocence of it and the characters before they have to go through all the traumatic hell they're put through later on, and maybe I just love the nostalgia too. It is the season that made me fall in love with the show, and the characters, after all. I remember the first episode airing on Channel 7 down here in late 1997, on at the same time as News Radio, which was and is one of my favorite comedy series of all time. I hadn't thought much to the movie version, hadn't heard any of the genre mags I read at the time give the series anything but the most perfunctory of mentions at this point, and wasn't exactly expecting much, so I taped it to watch the next day instead. I didn't fall in love with it straight off, but I enjoyed that first episode way more than I thought I would, and also instantly really liked the characters and actors, particularly Buffy, Xander, Giles and of course Willow, who I gained an almost instant crush on. I continued to enjoy the rest of the season more and more, and I think it was during the puppet show, which I sat watching cackling with absolute glee throughout, that I really realized that I had fallen in love with this show, and these guys. And in over 2 decades, I've never fallen out of love with it. That's why season 1 ranks at number 6. To be continued.